My name is Marcus and this happened when I was working the overnight security position at Clearview Mall last winter. I needed the money for grad school and the pay was decent for basically sitting at a desk and doing occasional rounds. Most nights were dead quiet, just me, the janitors, and the occasional maintenance worker. The mall had been built in the early 80s and had this weird layout with these long, narrow hallways connecting the main courts. There were sections that had been closed off years ago that we weren't supposed to enter during rounds, but I'd sometimes hear noises coming from those areas. My supervisor, Vince, was this older guy, maybe late 50s, who'd been working there forever. He always seemed on edge, but I figured that's just how he was. He'd sometimes stare off into space during shift changes, like he was looking for something the rest of us couldn't see. The first odd thing I noticed was about 2 months into the job. I was doing my 2 a.m. round and saw Vince standing in one of the service corridors that led to the abandoned wing. He wasn't supposed to be there, his shift had ended hours ago. When I called out to him, he just walked backwards into the darkness without saying anything. I followed, thinking maybe he'd forgotten something, but when I reached the doors to the old wing, they were locked and chained like always. I radioed the front desk where my partner Devin was stationed, asking if Vince had come back to the building. Devin said he hadn't seen him all night. I tried convincing myself I was just tired and seeing things. About a week later, I was reviewing the security footage from the previous night when I noticed something strange. At exactly 3:17 a.m., all the cameras in the East Wing cut out for exactly 7 minutes. When they came back on, nothing seemed different, but I swear one of the mannequins in the closed Macy's display window had changed position. I mentioned it to Devin, but he just laughed it off, saying the system glitched all the time. I wasn't convinced, so I started keeping a log of the camera outages. They always happened at 3:17 a.m., always lasted exactly 7 minutes, and always affected the same section of the mall. Things escalated when I started finding handprints on the inside of windows in stores that had been locked all night. Small handprints, like a child's. Mall management dismissed it as pranksters somehow getting in after hours, but I knew better. I'd personally checked every door and entry point during my rounds. Then I started hearing it, a soft humming sound coming from the vents. It was a melody I couldn't quite place, but it sounded like an old lullaby. The first time I heard it, I was doing my rounds near the abandoned food court. The sound stopped the moment I tried to record it. One night, Devin called in sick and I was alone for the entire shift. Around 2:30 a.m., I heard what sounded like children laughing from somewhere deep in the mall. I grabbed my flashlight and followed the sound to the locked doors of the abandoned wing. The chain was still in place, but the padlock was open. I knew I should have called for backup, but something compelled me to go in. The air inside was stale and cold, and my flashlight barely cut through the darkness. Old storefronts with faded signs lined the corridor, their glass facades covered in years of dust. The laughing had stopped, but now I could hear what sounded like footsteps running ahead of me. I followed them to the old carousel that had been shut down decades ago. To my shock, it was slowly turning, the painted horses moving up and down to music that wasn't playing. In the center of the carousel stood Vince, his back to me. Relief washed over me, at least I wasn't alone. I called out to him, and when he turned around, his eyes were completely black, and his mouth was stretched into an impossibly wide smile. "They've been waiting for you, Marcus," he said in a voice that wasn't his own. It was high-pitched, almost childlike. The lights on the carousel suddenly got brighter, and I saw them, at least a dozen small figures sitting on the horses, their features blurred and shifting. They all turned to look at me at once. I ran. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I quit the next day. Later, I looked into the mall's history. Turns out there was a fire in that wing back in 1987. 6 children and 1 security guard died when they became trapped in the service corridors. The guard's name? Vincent Carver. I still see Vince sometimes, in store windows as I walk by, in crowds at the supermarket. He's always watching me with those black eyes, and he's always smiling. I don't know what would have happened if I'd stayed on that carousel, and I never want to find out. I create content for a living, nothing fancy, just tutorial videos on gaming that I post on YouTube. After years of struggling, my channel finally hit 100,000 subscribers last summer, which was enough for me to quit my day job and focus on content creation full-time. Everything changed when I got an email from someone calling themselves The Algorithm. The subject line was my home address, which immediately set off alarm bells. The email itself was brief: "I've been studying your content. I can help you grow. Much faster than you're growing now. Just follow my advice." I almost deleted it as spam, but curiosity got the better of me. I replied asking what they meant. Within minutes, I received detailed analytics about my channel, information not even YouTube's Creator Studio provided. Exact viewer retention points, psychological profiles of my audience segments, even predictions about which videos would perform well based on factors I'd never considered. Some of it was unsettling. How did they know that 63% of my viewers watched my content while eating? Or that viewers who watched my videos at 2x speed were 74% more likely to subscribe? But the advice worked. I made the suggested tweaks to my next video, and my views quadrupled overnight. The emails continued, each more detailed than the last. The algorithm, as I'd started calling them, seemed to know exactly what content would perform well before I even made it. They suggested small changes to my speaking pattern, background colors, even the exact millisecond to place certain cuts for maximum retention. My subscriber count exploded: 250,000, then 500,000, then 1 million in just 3 months. The ad revenue was life-changing. I bought a new house, a new car, started investing. All while following the increasingly specific instructions from my mysterious advisor. Then the requests got stranger. The algorithm wanted me to include certain phrases in my videos, seemingly random words sprinkled throughout my scripts: cerulean whisper, temporal cascade, neural pathway 7. I didn't understand the purpose, but my metrics continued to climb, so I complied. They asked me to add barely perceptible images between frames, images they would send me that looked like abstract patterns or code. Again, I didn't question it. Success is addicting, and I was hooked. My viewers started commenting that they couldn't stop watching my videos. Some claimed they'd watched the same video dozens of times without realizing hours had passed. Others reported strange dreams where I was giving them instructions they couldn't quite remember upon waking. I should have stopped then, but 5 million subscribers and a monthly income most people don't make in a year will make you ignore a lot of red flags. The breaking point came when I received an email with instructions for my next video, along with a new image to embed. But this image was different. It wasn't abstract. It was a photo of me, sleeping in my bed, taken from inside my room the night before. Attached was a simple message: Phase 1 complete. 10 million neural pathways established. Begin Phase 2 implementation. I immediately deleted all my social media accounts and moved to my parents' cabin in Montana. No internet, no cell service. I thought I was safe. Until yesterday, when I found a handwritten note on my pillow. The algorithm isn't a person. It's not software. It's something else. And it's already inside the minds of everyone who watched your videos. Including you. I'm writing this as a warning. If you've watched any of my content in the past year, you might already be compromised. The patterns, the phrases, they were calibrated to create specific neural responses, to open pathways in the brain. For what purpose? I don't know. But sometimes at night, I catch myself whispering those same phrases, and for brief moments, I can feel something else looking through my eyes, using my voice, slowly taking control. They're coming for me now. I can hear cars pulling up outside. But they don't need to take me anywhere. The algorithm is already here, inside my head. And if you've been watching closely, it's inside yours too. I bought my dream house last spring, a charming Victorian in a quiet neighborhood with tree-lined streets and neighbors who actually wave when you drive by. After years of living in cramped apartments, I was thrilled to have space, a yard, and most importantly, privacy. The house next door was vacant when I moved in. It was similar to mine but larger, with boarded windows and an overgrown yard. The realtor told me it had been empty for nearly a decade after the previous owner died, and the family was tied up in probate court battles over inheritance. I didn't mind having a vacant house next door. One less neighbor to worry about, right? But about 2 months after I moved in, a moving truck pulled up. My new neighbor was a woman named Claire, mid-30s, soft-spoken, always dressed immaculately despite the summer heat. She introduced herself while I was gardening, bringing over homemade cookies that were actually delicious. Claire seemed nice enough, if a bit reserved. She mentioned she worked from home as a consultant but didn't elaborate further. Over the next few weeks, I noticed something odd. Claire never seemed to have any furniture delivered. The moving truck had been small, barely enough for a bed and some essentials, yet she claimed to be fully moved in when I asked. I work from home too, and my office window faces her house. I couldn't help but notice that her lights followed a strange pattern. They would turn on at exactly 7:23 p.m. every night, then off at 11:17 p.m. Not approximately, exactly, to the minute. No variation, no matter the day of the week. What really started to bother me, though, was the noise. Every night around 3 a.m., I'd wake up to what sounded like heavy furniture being dragged across hardwood floors. It would last for about 20 minutes, then stop abruptly. When I mentioned it casually to Claire, she seemed genuinely confused and said she was a deep sleeper who never got up at night. I'm not the confrontational type, so I invested in some earplugs and tried to ignore it. But then I started noticing other things. Claire never had visitors, never received packages, and I never saw any food deliveries. Her garbage bins were always empty on collection day. Most strange of all, I never saw her eat or drink anything besides the occasional glass of water when we spoke over the fence. One afternoon, I was in my attic looking for some old camping gear when I realized I could see directly into one of Claire's upstairs rooms through a small window. What I saw made no sense. The room was completely empty except for a single chair in the center, facing the wall. The walls themselves were covered in what looked like writing or symbols, floor to ceiling, in what appeared to be red ink. My curiosity got the better of me. I knew Claire left her house every Tuesday at 1 p.m. and returned exactly 2 hours later, another one of her strange patterns. The next Tuesday, I waited until she drove away, then walked over to her house, telling myself I was just going to peek through the windows to make sure everything was okay. The curtains were drawn on most windows, but I found one in the back where the curtain didn't quite close. I peered inside and saw her living room, completely empty. No furniture, no TV, no pictures on the walls. Just bare hardwood floors and blank walls. This made no sense given our conversations where she'd mentioned watching specific shows or sitting on her couch. I moved to another window and saw her kitchen. The refrigerator door was open, and it was completely empty. Not a single item of food. The cabinets were all open too, also empty. Not a plate, not a glass, not a utensil in sight. I was about to leave when I noticed her back door was slightly ajar. I know I should have just gone home, but something pulled me inside. The house was silent and cold despite the summer heat outside. I moved through the empty rooms, each one bare except for strange symbols painted on the ceiling, symbols that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. I made my way upstairs to the room I'd seen from my attic. The chair was there, facing the wall covered in those red symbols. As I got closer, I realized with horror that it wasn't ink. The writing appeared to be carved into the wall, the grooves filled with something dark and flaking. On the chair was a photo album. I opened it with trembling hands. The first page showed my house, taken from what would be Claire's bedroom window. The next page showed me, asleep in my bed. The next showed me in the shower. There were hundreds of photos, documenting every private moment of my life since I'd moved in. The last page was different. It showed Claire, standing in my kitchen, wearing my clothes, looking into my bathroom mirror. Except it wasn't quite Claire. The eyes were wrong, completely black, with no whites or pupils. Below the photo was a handwritten note, "Only 23 more days until I become you completely." I heard the front door open. Claire wasn't supposed to be back for another hour. I froze as footsteps made their way up the stairs, slow, deliberate steps that didn't sound quite right, as if the feet making them were somehow the wrong shape. I'm not proud of what I did next. I panicked and jumped out the window, breaking my ankle in the process. I crawled home, called the police, and packed a bag while waiting for them to arrive. The officers found nothing. The house was furnished normally, with no strange symbols or empty rooms. They showed me photos of a regular house with regular furniture. The chair was gone, the photo album nowhere to be found. Claire acted concerned about my fall and even offered to bring me meals while I recovered. I sold my house the next week at a significant loss and moved across the country. I still check the local news from my old neighborhood sometimes. 3 months after I left, my old house burned down in what investigators called a strange fire that burned at temperatures much higher than a normal house fire. The only thing that survived was a photo album found in the ruins of my bedroom closet. According to the news report, it was filled with photos of the current owner, all taken while she was sleeping. I've been an insomniac since I was a teenager, but last year it got really bad. I was averaging maybe 2 hours of sleep a night, and my doctor was concerned about the toll it was taking on my health. She suggested I try walking at night to tire myself out naturally instead of relying on sleeping pills. I live in a safe suburban neighborhood, so I started taking these long walks around midnight when everything was quiet. It actually helped. There's something peaceful about being the only person awake in a sleeping world. The exercise would tire me out enough that I could usually get 4 or 5 hours of sleep afterward. I had a regular route, down Maple Street, around the park, past the elementary school, and back home through Oak Avenue. About 3 miles total, which took me a little under an hour. I'd been doing this for about 2 weeks when I first noticed him. He was standing under a streetlight about a block ahead of me, tall, thin, wearing what looked like a long coat despite it being summer. Something about the way he stood was off, too rigid or something. When I got closer, he was gone, as if he'd just vanished. I didn't think much of it until I saw him again the next night, in exactly the same spot, under the same streetlight. Again, he disappeared as I approached. This happened for 5 nights straight, always at the same spot, always disappearing. I started taking a different route. That's when things got weird. No matter which streets I took, I would see him exactly 15 minutes into my walk, always under a streetlight, always disappearing as I got close. It got to the point where I was anticipating it, even timing it, 15 minutes in, like clockwork. I decided to ask around, see if anyone else had noticed this strange figure. Most of my neighbors thought I was just experiencing sleep deprivation hallucinations, but Mrs. Abernathy, an elderly woman who'd lived in the neighborhood for over 50 years, turned pale when I described him. She told me about Thomas Crane, a man who had lived in my house back in the 1970s. He suffered from extreme insomnia and would walk the neighborhood at night. One night, he never came home. They found his body 3 days later in the park, under a streetlight. The cause of death was never determined, but his eyes were wide open, and his face was frozen in an expression of pure terror. I laughed it off. Ghost stories don't usually get to me. But that night on my walk, I decided to do something different. When I spotted him at the 15-minute mark, instead of walking toward him, I turned around and walked in the opposite direction. When I glanced back, he was following me, moving with an unnatural gait, like his legs were too long for his body. I walked faster, he walked faster. I started running. Somehow he kept pace while appearing to move slowly. No matter how fast I ran, he maintained the same distance behind me. I made it home and locked the door, watching through the peephole. He stood across the street, staring directly at my house until sunrise, when he seemed to fade away with the morning light. I didn't walk that night. Or the next. For a full week, I stayed in after dark. My insomnia returned with a vengeance. I couldn't sleep at all now. By the 8th day, I was desperate for relief, so I convinced myself it had all been in my head and decided to try walking again, just a quick one around the block. The moment I stepped outside, I saw him, not a block away this time, but right across the street. And this time, I could see his face clearly. Or rather, the absence of a face. Where features should have been was just smooth, pale skin stretched too tight over a skull that wasn't quite the right shape. I ran back inside and called the police. They came, found nothing, and left after taking a report that I'm sure was filed under sleep-deprived hallucinations. That's when the tapping started, gentle at first, on my bedroom window. Tap, tap, tap. Every night, same time, same rhythm. I installed security cameras, but they never picked up anything, even though I could hear it clearly. Last week, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to confront whatever this thing was. When the tapping started, I threw open my curtains. He was there, face pressed against the glass, those smooth features now distorted into something resembling a smile. His mouth opened, too wide, impossibly wide, revealing nothing but darkness inside. A voice that seemed to bypass my ears and speak directly into my mind said, "Your turn to walk forever." I blinked, and suddenly I was outside, standing under a streetlight. I tried to move but couldn't. I watched as a young woman walked down the street, stopped, and looked at me with curiosity before continuing on her way. Every night, I stand under that light. Every night, I try to warn the walkers who pass by. And every night, I disappear when they get too close, only to reappear 15 minutes into their walk, wherever they might be. If you suffer from insomnia and take walks at night, check your watch when you see someone standing under a streetlight. If it's exactly 15 minutes into your walk, turn around. Go home. Block your windows. And whatever you do, don't look at their face when they tap on your window.